In 2021, the world marks the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage, the right to vote in the UK. But it wasn't easy. Women fought long and hard for their right to be heard at the polling station, and they faced brutal opposition. This is the story of the suffragette movement, a history that's more thrilling than you might think. Before we start, this is a documentary made by us for you. If you love to learn, hit that subscribe button to be notified every time we release a new video. Let's jump back into it. So, women's suffrage, the right for women to vote, has been a huge deal in recent centuries. And if you're watching this video, you probably already know that it was one of the biggest social movements in British history. But why? Why do we care so much about this? Well, the answer is simple. Before the early 1900s, women couldn't vote. They were essentially barred from public life. And when they tried to exercise their democratic right and cast a ballot, they were met with violence and arrest. That is until the beginning of the 20th century, when a militant movement fought for change and won. The story of the suffragettes is not only fascinating, but also terrifying, covering everything from hunger strikes to arson. But despite all of these struggles, the campaigners won the right to vote in 1918. It's a testament to their bravery and sacrifice. So join us as we explore how women won the vote, how they changed society forever. But first, let's get some basics out of the way. The word suffrage comes from the Latin word suffragium, meaning a vote or the casting of a vote. Suffrage is the right to vote. So women's suffrage is the right for women to vote. In other words, the right to participate in political life. Now let's get into the details. When it comes to the fight for women's suffrage in Britain, it's important to remember that it didn't happen overnight. The fight for the vote had been going on since the 1860s. However, it was during the early 20th century that things began to move most rapidly towards the goal of voting rights. At the beginning of the 20th century, women were still second-class citizens. They could not vote, and they did not have access to the same opportunities as men. Things started to change in 1903 with the formation of the Women's Social and Political Union, commonly known as the WSPU. This group was formed by Emmeline and Christabel Pankhurst, two leading figures in the fight for women's suffrage. The organization took a militant approach to the campaign, which resulted in protests, marches, and acts of civil disobedience. Members of the WSPU disrupted political meetings, chained themselves to railings outside government buildings, and even bombed the homes of prominent anti-suffrage politicians. Their actions were seen as outrageous by many at the time, but they were effective in raising awareness of the cause. The movement reached a turning point in 1913 when the government introduced the Conciliation Bill, which granted limited voting rights to women. However, the bill was defeated in Parliament, and the campaigners' frustration grew. The First World War broke out in 1914, and women's suffrage became a more pressing issue. With men away fighting at the front, women were taking on more responsibilities, and it seemed like the time was ripe for change. Throughout the war, women's groups continued to agitate for the right to vote. They organized marches, demonstrations, and strikes, and they also played a key role in the war effort. They served in the armed forces, worked in factories and farms, and volunteered for the Red Cross. Despite their contributions, however, they were still denied the right to vote. In 1916, the WSPU launched a major campaign of civil disobedience. Their plan was to disrupt the upcoming general election by running their own candidates in every constituency. They also organized mass meetings and marches, and they encouraged women to commit acts of vandalism against property owned by prominent anti-suffrage politicians. This campaign was more radical than ever before, and it resulted in hundreds of arrests. As the situation escalated, the government cracked down on the movement. In 1919, the WSPU was banned, and its leaders were arrested. But the fight for women's suffrage was far from over. A new organization, the National Union of Women's Suffrage Societies, or the NAWSS, was formed, and it continued the campaign. Finally, in 1928, the Representation of the People Act granted equal voting rights to all women over the age of 21. So what can we learn from the suffragette movement? How did they win such an important victory for women's rights? The suffragette movement was a long and arduous struggle, but it was ultimately successful in achieving its goal of winning the right to vote for women. There are several factors that contributed to this success. Firstly, the movement was well organized and had the support of many influential people. Secondly, the campaigners were brave and determined, and they were willing to make personal sacrifices in order to achieve their goals. Finally, the outbreak of war and the changing role of women during that time helped to shift public opinion in favor of women's suffrage. Now let's take a closer look at the tactics used by the suffragettes. The movement used a variety of tactics to achieve its goals, including peaceful protests, civil disobedience, and acts of vandalism. Peaceful protests were a common tactic used by the suffragettes. They organized marches, demonstrations, and rallies to raise awareness of their cause and to put pressure on the government to introduce legislation granting them the right to vote. Civil disobedience was another tactic used by the suffragettes. They often broke laws designed to restrict their activities, such as laws prohibiting them from holding public meetings or marching in the streets. Acts of vandalism were also used by the suffragettes to target the property of prominent anti-suffrage politicians or organizations. The suffragette movement was not without its critics. Many people at the time opposed the tactics used by the suffragettes and saw them as too radical or disruptive. However, the movement, its supporters argued that the tactics were necessary in order to achieve their goals and that the ends justified the means. Another important aspect of the suffragette movement was the use of propaganda. The suffragettes produced a wide range of propaganda, including pamphlets, posters, and badges, to promote their cause and to rally support. This propaganda often contained powerful imagery and slogans that were designed to appeal to the emotions of the audience and to persuade them to support the movement. Finally, the suffragette movement was able to draw upon the support of a number of influential allies. Many intellectuals, artists, and activists supported the suffragette cause and helped to raise awareness of their struggle. The movement also gained the support of some members of the royal family, which helped to give it greater legitimacy and respectability. Overall, the suffragette movement was a remarkable achievement and a testament to the bravery and determination of the women who fought for the right to vote. Their struggle was long and hard, but their victory was a major step forward for women's rights and equality. After 1918, women continued to fight for equality in other areas of public life, such as employment and education. They also worked to ensure that their right to vote was protected and expanded. The suffragette movement had a lasting legacy and inspired future generations of feminists to fight for gender equality around the world. So there you have it, the fascinating story of the suffragette movement and how women won the right to vote in Britain. It was a hard-won victory that required the dedication and sacrifice of countless individuals, but the impact of their efforts can still be felt today. We hope you enjoyed learning about this important part of history, and thank you for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to be notified every time we release a new video.